Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be looking at turnover, and hopefully by the end of this video you will realize that it means very, very little. Firstly, it's great to be back and it feels really, really good to be making videos again. And yeah, on to today's topic is I've been hearing so many people and seeing so many influencers talking about like, oh, how I've made 5, 6 figures turnover. Well, they don't specify turnover. They always go 5, 6, 7 figures. And it's driving me nuts because I know that that doesn't mean jack at the end of the day. And that's really, really starting to bug me. So I'm going to break down a couple things and why you need to pay attention to it when you see these things. So, firstly, turnover is vanity and profit is sanity. So I always keep that in the back of my mind thinking, okay, great, because every business owner does like to look at their turnover, and it is a very nice indication and it can be a good indication of how the business is doing. But generally, when you look at it, that's just the top line, right? So when you're looking at a financial statement, you're looking at turnover, and then you got to deduct every single thing else. And especially you guys selling on take a lot like myself, it's retail. You're buying something and you're selling it. You're only making a little bit on top of what you pay. So those kinds of industries, like you can expect sort of 5% net profit if you're lucky. Some retail shops operate at even less than that. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So you buy you get the turnover, and then you got to deduct all the costs of goods sold. Then you've got all the expenses, then you've got some taxes, and then you're left with a little bit of something at the end of that. So that kind of mentality, you have to keep remembering that, if someone's saying they've got these kinds of figures, you have to try to understand what the business is and what it's actually doing, and not to be like, oh wow, uh that's many millions that he's got in his pocket. Believe me, I've done many millions in sales, but it doesn't mean that it's just going straight into my pocket. You just spend it straight out, and you try to keep a little bit for yourself from all of that. And speaking about cash and trying to keep a little bit for yourself, that's another thing that I see these guys talking about. And they start these businesses, and maybe they've got a website or something like that, and you kind of have to discern between what is a business and what is a hustle. And I love both, and both are really, really perfect in their own ways. But you want the system to be a sort of a design, a system that runs itself and keeps going, and you're able to sort of step aside and view that from the outside. Whereas a hustle, you're kind of putting a lot of your own energy and time into it, and it's you're not really trying to build it for the long term. And that's, yeah, when you're doing a business and you're talking about turnover figures, and you have to realize that the part of that turnover that ends up in your pocket doesn't come for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, maybe longer. And because you have to build it up and you have to keep going and you have to get something there that's going to generate the value for your customers at the end of the day. And that means taking any profits that you do make and just putting it back in. So that is something very, very, very important to remember. Now, you may be thinking, what actually makes a good business or a valuable business? Well, this is how I would look at it. Firstly, I ignore turnover. I use it as a tiny, tiny indication, but I have to know first what the business does and to understand, okay, is like, let's put it in a very simple example. uh Retail versus service, and R1 million in retail revenue versus R1 million in service revenue is light years apart. Because if it's consultants, their costs and their expenses is probably, their cost of goods sold is probably nothing, and their expenses is probably a bit of software and staff. But generally, there's a lot more wiggle room. Whereas if it's retail, it's unlikely that you're buying something for 100,000 and selling it for 10x on the regular. Maybe you are, though. It's not impossible. But yeah, so I kind of ignore the turnover, and I look at the net profit, what's left at the end of it. Depending on the size of the business, I like to look at how realistic the salaries are, because as small businesses, the owners kind of grow with their business, but they tend to not compensate themselves as if they weren't an owner. So you have to look at it. Okay, if you're going to sell the business, someone else may step in and they need to replace the owner now with an employee, and that cost has to be factored in. Then I look at the balance sheet. Do they have any debts? Because a lot of these people saying, "Oh, I've got millions in revenue," have immense amounts of debts and they have sleepless nights over it. And I've been there myself where the debts are just out of control. And you sure you've got sales, but it's, you're playing a very fast-paced game where you're like, okay, if this stock needs to arrive on this time so I can pay these people back, and then you're calculating the cost of interest against how much money you're making. It's a very fun, but a very, very, very precise game. And looking at how much debt they've got and is it manageable and is it under control is very, very important. Then you got to look at the assets, like the physical assets, inventory. You got to look at, well, maybe they've got a property or a building or office space. And then I like to look at the fringe assets, which are things like potentially very unique people that work there, as like the team is an asset on its own, marketing channels, brand presence, recurring customers, customer loyalty, brand loyalty, all of those things that fall into, like, there's not a really, it's like a very airy fairy, like there's no value on it, but I myself can put a value on it and see what it's actually worth at the end of the day. So I like to look at those factors. And then obviously the very, very, very last, but also the most important thing to look at is on the business side is like, are you buying yourself more freedom? Because how much money it's making and your time that's going to go into it, that also has to pay into the calculation. Because, at the end of the day, you do want a business that is going to allow you to separate yourself and that you can relax and you can enjoy life and do all of those things. So very hard to imagine, well, while you're so young, but as you get more matured into the business world, those are the kinds of things that are going to make a difference. And remember, if you're buying a business or selling a business, these are the things that another buyer or the seller is going to have to take note of. It's like that freedom aspect has to be part of the calculation, because money, I guess, can't really always buy you your time back at the end of the day. So, guys, that's basically it for today. It's good to be back, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'm Andy. I do business tips and tricks to help you grow your business. So until next time, cheers.